So at Sony's conference at Paris this week, we got our first look at Uncharted 4's multiplayer, and we learned a few new details about the mode. For one, the game is going to launch with microtransactions for online weapons, tools, and upgrades, which I told you microtransactions were going to be in this game the other day whenever I did a video about microtransactions. Some people got mad saying that I mentioned it and I didn't know what I was talking about. But I mean, what's new? They also said that they're going to use the beta as a way to gauge how to use microtransactions to make sure that it remains fair for everyone so that it's not a pay to win. They also say that everything that you can buy in the game can also be unlocked by playing. We also learned that the game's going to run at 900p, 60 frames per second when it comes to the multiplayer. On the single-player campaign, it's going to be 1080p, 30 frames per second. And this has probably caused the most controversy, it seems, simply because so many people have run their mouth about how 1080p is basically the most important feature when it comes to games. They've backed themselves into a corner and relied on this crunch so much that they don't know what the hell to do when that crunch is knocked out from under them. And Sony PR really started this. I mean, if you take a look back at near the launch, I mean, they had one of their PR guys on Twitter saying that you better get used to hearing about 1080p, 60 frames per second on the PlayStation 4. We've heard countless people proclaim that the PS4 is the most powerful console, and that's why many actually went and bought it. We've heard claims of no parity. You know, people claiming that the Xbox is holding the station back from its glorious power. But the last time I checked, the naughty gods weren't developing for Xbox. But you know, I mentioned this the other day. What major exclusives can you think of that Sony has released that hasn't been remasters that's been 1080p, 60 frames per second throughout a game? I mean, Bloodborne, Drive Club, everybody's gone to the Rapture, Infamous, Knack, The Order. All those games are 1080p, 30 frames per second. And even when games do reach the magical 1080p, there's a pretty lengthy list of games where the frame rate has suffered because of it. Until Dawn being the last major release that I can think of, where at some points it drops down into the teens as far as the frame rate goes. Now, no doubt Sony has more games that reach a higher resolution than on competing platforms, even if the frame rate suffers a bit in getting there. And it doesn't do it on all games, but it does do it on a number of them. And, I mean, everybody would agree that looking at the hardware on paper, PS4 is a little bit more powerful in certain areas. But when are people going to listen to the countless devs who have told you that there really isn't that much difference between the machines? They're both struggling to put out 1080p 60 frames per second on games. And if that's your biggest selling point, you were sold some snake oil, my friend. You should have bought a PC instead. The bottom line is this: Naughty Dog made the right decision. How many times have you heard me say frame rate over resolution? Because the average person cannot tell the difference between 900p and 1080p, even when they're side by side. We've done videos on this. I've shown you proof of it. You don't play resolution. There is a reason, though, why so many AAA first-person shooters this gen are making sure that their games are hitting 60 frames per second no matter what. And they're sacrificing resolution in order to get that. And that's because frames do affect the actual game. When you have twice as many frames per second on screen, guess what? The scene is going to be more fluid. Your reaction times are going to be more precise. The game is just going to look and feel better. Gameplay over graphics all day long. If you're just interested in graphics, though, you need to look at some of the more powerful consoles out on the market, like some of the Steam machines, or get a PC. You're in the wrong business if you're looking at PS4 and Xbox One delivering the top quality when it comes to graphics. And, I mean, the super fanboys are having aneurysms right now, in part because if you remember at E3 during the reveal, the Uncharted 4 trailer was in 1080p 60 frames per second. And so they've been led to believe that, again, this is the most important number in gaming. They've also been dogging Halo 5 recently in the last few days because they had to use dynamic resolution in order to hit 1080p 60 frames per second on the multiplayer and the campaign, even though the game looks great. And no doubt, Uncharted is also going to look great It's not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. Naughty Dog made the right decision for the real gamers out there. So the moral of the story is, don't go throwing rocks in glass houses, because you sure as hell don't want to be inside when it starts crashing down.
Are you listening? Damn.